Welcome to the last day of Denver Startup Week. I'm Eric Matisik. I'm the CEO of the Colorado Technology Association. We're a proud sponsor of this event and really appreciate all you being here this morning. This morning we have a really special panel. In the sea of 180 events this week, I assume this caught your eye predominantly because from an enterprise perspective, we have three leaders here in the front range that are leading some of the largest technology enterprises that are in our midst. And so as we're thinking about entrepreneurship through the lens of enterprise, it couldn't have a more fitting panel here this morning. The Leadership Spotlight Series is brought to you by Basecamp, launched by Chase. This wouldn't be possible without our title sponsors, the Downtown Denver Partnership, the Colorado Technology Association, Comcast, and Chase. And so huge thank you to them for allowing us to have this huge week and celebrate everything that we're doing entrepreneurial in the city. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And so the purpose of this panel is really to discuss innovation in the C-suite, specifically in enterprise. A lot of things we've talked about this week is how to start up, how to engage with early companies, lean startup principles, just how to get started. This is through the lens of titans running very large technology, enterprise, and innovation budgets, and the things they're looking for to accelerate growth at the highest level. So the opposite end of the spectrum of a lot of the things we've discussed this week. So I think we're going to go through about a 25-minute panel and then kind of more of a fireside chat, and then wrap up with some Q&A. So think about some questions as we wrap up. So this morning, I think we'll get started and allow each of them to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their company, and just kind of the scope and scale, kind of the arc of the business per se. And then we can kind of jump into some questions about innovations that are happening inside of the enterprise world. So we'll start with Melvin, the CIO of Arrow Electronics.
Thank you, Eric. And full disclosure, I am about a year and 1 month having relocated from Long Island out to Colorado, and it's been a wonderful experience. And I just finally moved into my house 2 days ago, and it is a work in process. So I'm sure many of you have similar experiences in your lives, but it's been great to relocate to Colorado, and it's a wonderful community and place to be. Arrow Electronics, a little bit earlier than I did, relocated from New York to Colorado. I think it's probably 3 or 4 years ago, maybe longer. I don't remember. But we are now headquartered out of Denver, and we have quite a big workforce now based in Englewood and throughout the community. Overall, Arrow's over a $20 billion company in electronics and computer product distribution, operating across the globe with over 16,000 employees when you include everybody on the different countries and the different geographies where we operate. So happy to be here and look forward to the discussion.
And just by way of, if we're counting, Arrow is the largest Fortune company in the state of Colorado by annual revenue at a little over, close to 26 billion.
Well, good morning. My name's Rob Milan. I'm the CIO for Hunter Douglas North America. And we manufacture window coverings. We operate in about 80 countries around the world. And it's an interesting story of what brought us to Colorado. We have a large manufacturing facility, or set of facilities up in Broomfield, and it started in the early 80s. We bought a small company that had a very innovative type of material that we thought we could make into window coverings, and that's grown into, I think we have 6 manufacturing buildings in Broomfield, quite a number of manufacturing jobs here in the state. So we love Colorado, and Hunter Douglas likes being part of the tech economy here.
Mike Marcotte. I've spent the last 9.5 years as the Global Chief Digital Officer at the EchoStar Dish Network Hughes ecosystem. Company that's been in Colorado since 1980. We operate in 37 countries, have close to 100,000 employees. If you take the joint ventures and all of the different components of that ecosystem, a little north of $20 billion in annualized revenue. My role was a little bit unique in that I had both the technology organizations rolling up to me, but I also had line of business responsibility. So we effectively monetized IT as a customer-facing resource for our business.
So I think, Michael, I think it's kind of fitting, being Startup Week, to probably start with a little bit of a background from you as well. When you look at lean startup principles and you see kind of how enterprise handles what the startup community does, which is rapidly develop product, how are you seeing that innovation kind of working in concert with, or how are lean principles impacting your companies?
That's a really interesting question. We've battled with this for a long time, and I'll just give you guys a little vignette. So, we're really, really good at doing some things. The big, huge, process-heavy ERP system that, boy, if you don't have that thing in right, the business stops operating. So it is not trivial at all. And we're very good at it. We're very good at the project management component, following the SDLC. But the same things that make us good at that, Eric, break us when it comes to innovation. So a number of years ago, we had this idea, let's go build a solution center, for lack of a better term, up on the US 36 corridor, right by your office. And let's get some really smart, innovative people, and let's keep PMO away from them, and let's have them rapidly develop customer-facing systems. And then, this inspirational moment hits us. Well, maybe we can inculcate both of the groups with some goodness from each other. We'll take the innovative group and put them together with more of the monolithic organization. Well, the opposite happened. They both broke each other. So, the lesson for us was not only the culture is different, but how all those folks have grown up is different. And it's okay to have them completely separate. It's okay. I mean, even the attire is different. And trying to force those two things together was a mistake for us. But they're both good at what they do for very different reasons and a very different product set, for lack of a better term.
Actually, I want to jump in. I heard a great quote kind of around this topic this past weekend. And it goes something like this. We live in a world that's fast changing from one where the big eat the small to one where the fast eat the slow. And to Mike's point, most of our large organizations are very good at running complex manufacturing processes, distribution processes. We're not very good at going fast. So when Eric asked me to be part of the panel, he said, one of the things we're going to talk about is what are enterprise IT organizations buying. And I'll tell you, among the many things we buy, a one-word answer is most important for this audience. We're buying speed. Because in most cases, as Mike says, it's hard to teach ourselves speed. So we're looking for products and services we can buy that add speed and innovation and make that possible. I don't know, have you seen anything similar in your world?
No, I would agree with both of you guys. I think the one thing that I do see is that part of the decision process now for who's buying technology is not just the CIO, right? It's the business leadership. So when you think about your company strategies, you're solving business problems for business people, and the technology understanding that now exists across a chief marketing officer or across somebody leading global sales, they're very interested in how they can drive their strategy and their objectives through technology. So where all that decision process used to really run through my office, that's changed dramatically over the last 3 to 5 years, and I think it's going to continue to be a shift in terms of the relationship and ownership. So when you're thinking about who your customer is, certainly we have a big role to play in that, from making sure that the company is standard, governance, strategic, secure, but ultimately a lot of the decision process is now very cooperative with the business leadership, and we're trying to solve, to Mike's point, we're trying to solve business problems that are going to add value, and usually that's a joint exercise with the leadership that owns that with me in terms of delivering that particular set of capabilities.
In preparation, one of the questions we had talked about was really looking at through the lens of the CIO of a global business. What are the technologies that you see that you're really interested in? Like the emerging things that you have your eye on 3, 4, to Arrow's point, 5 years out, that you're looking at saying, I can see that really accelerating or making my company fast in the future. Are there things around cyber? Is it BI? Is it marketing automation? What are the tools inside of there that are most interesting and you see growing most rapidly?
Let me take a crack at that. So Hunter Douglas, we manufacture window coverings, and we sell through independent dealers. So if you wanted to buy Hunter Douglas for your home, you would come to one of our many local dealers. And primarily they are small businesses, very good at marketing the product and working with you in your home, not as good at, to Eric's point, the BI side of it. How do they understand what products are or not selling? What product lines can they move faster that will give them higher margin? And we're in a position to do that analysis with them or for them. So we're trying to learn fast. How do you go from doing large scale business intelligence to small business intelligence, which is a different set of challenges. So we're looking at what technologies make that easier for our dealers.
Yeah, Rob's mentioned a couple of times speed. Speed has become paramount importance. When we look at our business and we say, okay, we've got to target a new market segment, we've got to move so quickly from a technological standpoint. We can't wait 2 months for the infrastructure guys to lay down the Unix fabric and the storage guys to do their things. And the neat thing about modern tools, and we just take a rapid development on platforms such as ROR, you literally can have a full stack system up and prototyped within a week. And by the way, if it sucks, you didn't spend a whole lot of money on it. You fail fast, and you say, okay, you didn't like that. That's all right. We didn't spend a whole lot of money on it, and we can redo it in a week. Now, again, this is very, very different than what I will call the table stakes systems for some of our businesses. We have massive CRM systems, massive ERP systems. Those systems cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and we rely on for compliance. So it's all right that they take 2 years and $2 million. And they've got to be done right too. But so to answer your question directly, BI, profoundly important. We have to monetize the data we have. I don't care what business we're in. And to Rob's point, you don't necessarily have to boil the ocean. Take something you can be successful at and do that really, really well, and then get your business partners excited about it, and then you'll have other successes. So BI, profoundly important. Security is profoundly important. But the rub with security is not only does it have to be secure, it's got to work. The worst nightmare for all three of us is the CEO gets a new iPhone and walks into the office and doesn't work. All right, that's where we go from being strategic to I can't print real quick. And who do you think the IT help desk is? Well, it's us. So security, profoundly important, but it's got to satisfy both of those concerns. And then lastly, customer-facing rapid development platforms. Customer-facing.
How does being Startup Week, how does startup employees or the millennial kind of generation fit into some of these large organizations? Do you see a difference in your hiring practices as you're trying to add innovation, or is it entrepreneurship? Are you developing internally? How's it happening?
Well, I think Mike mentioned earlier, we've sort of moved a big portion of the IT organization out of the corporate structure and actually put it into a business function primarily around our e-commerce strategies. And so, they're hiring a skill set, probably more web-based developers, Java tool sets. In the back of the engine room, you've got Oracle, PL SQL, the traditional sort of transactional infrastructure that still is absolutely critical. What I do find interesting is that, if you looked at the job or the career expectations of the employees that are newer to the business, they're far more interested in skill development. What am I going to get out of this experience that's going to make me better and more effective? Where, if you looked at it 15, 20 years ago, people wanted a career with a company. Now people want an experience that's going to build their professional tool set to allow them to be more capable. So organizing your structure and your advancement plans around how you retain and build talent, you have to think about that value proposition a little differently, because the idea that you can leave somebody in a role for 5 to 7 years to mature and go into a first-line management role that would be more of a traditional corporate, sort of plan or structure, it doesn't resonate today with folks who are really worried about their own set of capabilities, because after the economic challenges we've had over the last few years, most folks are very concerned about, am I going to be valuable not just for the job I have today, but the job I'm going to have tomorrow? Or God forbid I have to change a job, I want to make sure that my talents are resonant and valuable in a broader community or broader space. So we've tried to adjust to that, and I think it's still a work in process.
Yeah, and what I would say is we're leaving, or we've left the era where the company managed your career and development, and we've entered the era where the person manages their own career and development. And so the three of us and the organizations we represent are probably slow to adapt to that, but trying to pedal fast to get ready because we understand that the innovative skills and approaches are going to come from millennials, not from the folks you see here on the stage. And we have to adapt our organization's way of doing career development to reflect that.
Yeah, the word adapt is a good one. You know, I don't want to get mired in the cliche here, but you must be flexible and adaptive, regardless of your size. I don't care if you're two-person organization or 200,000 person organization. And because of the way that people learn and the kind of intellectual competency that we need in organizations, this has gotten vastly more complex to go find really, really intellectually competent people. 20 years ago, it was easy. You know, you went up to Boulder and you set up a little booth and, you know, you talked to all the guys and gals graduating and, you know, those were your smartest people. Well, today's smartest people may not have even gone that route. They may have gone to Galvanize, right? They may have come out of 16 different, you know, sources, whether experientially learning or formally learning, to get themselves up to speed, and all of their brains work a little bit differently. So instead of just go, I mean, I'm not negating the fact that you still got to go to CU or Harvard or MIT to find some of your brightest people. You certainly do, but you may also need to go to the coffee shop up on Pearl Street because there's some pretty damn smart people in there too. And this is a whole new way of thinking about things.
From a startup community perspective, how do your organizations engage in the startup community, or what's the API of sorts for the startup community to engage with your organizations, or how do you see that burgeoning kind of activity in Colorado being part of the story or not inside of an EchoStar, an Arrow, Hunter Douglas?
Well, one answer, CTA, of course. That's the key to all introductions in the startup.
Thank you.
Shameless plug.
Yes.
I have two board members on the stage, so thank you. One of them identified himself.
One that's being stalked.
All joking aside, CTA does play a central role, and there are some other organizations that do that kind of facilitate the interaction between larger enterprises and startups. And I'll go back to what I said before. A key thing that we are looking to buy these days is speed. And we see probably the best source of that is startups and early stage tech companies. So that's part of my job description, is spending time with folks who are in that segment of our economy very often. 5 years ago, I did it once a year. Now I probably do it twice a month.
Very quickly, I would just say, lending to something I said earlier, we don't try and do the rapid development stuff internally anymore because we're not good at it. We're just not good at it. The recognition of that is profoundly important. So we'll go give that to a small, smart, nimble company. But how do we pick that company? It's usually based on referenceability. So if I give any piece of advice, if you guys are out there starting customers, work on that reference client. Work profoundly hard on that reference client. So, you know, Vin or Rob is willing to pick up the phone and call one of their colleagues and say, these guys are great. You get calls like that, you're off to the races.
I guess the only thing I would add is that you first have to listen to whoever it is that you're in dialogue with, and you have to solve a problem. You know, sometimes I think folks get really focused on, we have this cool idea or we have this cool technology. I just talked to a firm the other day that had a wonderful product. It was somehow it virtualized Java, so it added a whole layer of security to a Java stack. But in my world, that really wasn't a problem that was a complete priority for me to go deal with. And so they were selling what was a great technology, and I fully acknowledge, but that wasn't the problem that I needed them to solve. So when you're engaging, whether it be that first reference or it be that opportunity, you know, you really have to listen a little bit between the lines to, is your message really being understood and is it resonating? And sometimes we'll give direction, and sometimes I think people don't pick up on that in terms of, no, this is really important to me. And, you know, somebody keeps, you know, going in the other direction because that's what they've invested so much in. And I think being nimble and listening as you're starting to figure out how to get traction with your first idea or your first customer, I think that flexibility and that listening is extremely important to get you that sort of bootstrap or that first chance.
So companies at your scale, one of the things we see a lot is this concept of an innovation lab. You see Comcast setting them up. You see Procter & Gamble setting them up. You know, how does that, you know, when you look at the future of global enterprise, how does that asset really drive that connectivity between the front of the innovation and to your, I think we've talked about a lot, the real ERP, big technology activities in the system, and why do you see that trend growing so fast?
So I may not answer that appropriately, but I'm not a big fan of innovation labs or innovation centers. I think what we're all trying to do is drive innovation throughout the organization. And quite frankly, innovative people, creative people, folks who are willing to drive change, take risk, that's what I'm trying to instill in the organization. And it doesn't matter whether that's in developing a better way to handle invoicing in the traditional businesses that we need to continue to be aggressive in improving, or is the best new widget on the planet that we all of a sudden, came up and developed. But, I think of center of competencies, and sometimes I think of center of cost. So I really want to keep that charter tied to the return on investment and the P&L and the value that the company's going to drive. So I prefer to think of innovation as something that I have to have every employee start to understand and embrace as part of their job function versus trying to carve it out and think that it exists only in one place.
And Eric, I would just say, something you and I talk a whole lot about. It depends. It just depends. There are appropriate places that it not be within your walls, while at the same time, I agree with Vin. You need to embrace taking risks. You need to actually embrace failure rather than club it over the head. Say, hey, we didn't do well on this, but what are the 9 things that we learned? So the next iteration we go at this, we knocked the ball out of the park. You have to create culture around that regardless of your organization. And it'll help foster some of that innovative spirit within the company.
Hunter Douglas is kind of the opposite culture of build a big innovation lab. We're very decentralized. I think in North America we're 40-some different business units with a lot of product innovation inside of every business unit. So I kind of laugh at the concept of we need more innovation. Let's build a building and buy ping pong tables, and that'll solve the problem. Sort of that would run 180 degrees
Where's
from
Jim
our
Dieters?
culture.
Get him in here fast.
I think
If you work at Hunter Douglas, there's no ping pong.
Yeah, no ping pong. Something I think I've talked about, with all three of you off and on over the course of the last year is this notion of being able to talk enterprise and talk startup. And when companies are approaching organizations like yours, what's the most effective way, whether it's preparation or whether it's research or whether it's a referenceable customer, what's your tips and tricks for entrepreneurs to communicate effectively and speak enterprise?
Well, I'm gonna build on what both Vin and Mike said. So, solve a problem that the enterprise has. Have a reference client, because most of us are by nature risk averse. I mean, we've grown up trying to run data centers and large ERP systems at 5 nines, so we're kind of dipped in the risk averse water. And one of the fastest way to get us past that is have a reference client that we can call. We may know them, even if we don't know them. We're gonna listen closely to that. So those really, I want to second what my colleague said. Those are the 2 most important things. And maybe the third is patience, and that's hard when you're going fast, trying to get those first few customers. Enterprises, we said, by nature are somewhat slow. So a sell cycle, even for the most fantastic product, trust me, it takes longer than you think it should.
Yeah, the sales cycles are extremely long, so you got to be patient. You got to be willing to farm the account rather than just go hunt it and kill it. I would say present company excluded up here. When you're going in to sell to a Fortune 500, you need to be really, really buttoned up. You may have a certain style and attire and everything else that works in your daily life, but there's this when in Rome piece too, and I could make some jokes about old white guys. But that still exists in large corporations. So, you have to be willing to transform yourself a little bit when you're going into the C-suite to have a conversation. Do your homework before you go in there, too.
I think, if you're a startup and you're thinking that you're going to develop something and sell it to the Fortune 500, and I was looking at giving you some VC funding, I'd be a little nervous about that. And the reason is you heard it from the two gentlemen here, long sell cycle, risk averse. So as you think about your business plan and you think about getting into an enterprise level organization, and if that's going to be your charter or your mission for how you're going to develop what your capability is, I think what I've seen work is what Mike suggested, is you have a good problem to solve, you solve it in a reference account, and then you start a domino effect where you can cascade it because you have that use case that you can apply and you can really gain traction and move quickly with that. But that front end process is long. You're probably investing in front of return, so you're utilizing cash. It may not be as sustainable as starting small in a market where you can gain some traction, where the risk point in terms of the investment that's being made is much less, and then you can kind of adapt from there and maybe decide, can you take that model enterprise class? But from my perspective, that's a scary proposition because it's a huge investment sell cycle, and sometimes it's not your product. Sometimes it's, I don't want to invest in a startup because I'm worried they're going to get bought by somebody else and the product will get absorbed, right?
Let's talk about Colorado. All three of you are passionate about what's happening here in the state, and Vin, you just be able to join the excitement with, I know, your passion for skiing. When you look at the workforce here, what really differentiates building this business in Colorado or some of your other offices around the globe? Like, what are those things that you're like, that's the Colorado style or that's the Colorado way that you see within your enterprise?
Well, simply put, it's collaboration. And I've worked in a number of other large cities, so New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and some smaller cities. And what differentiates Colorado in general is we're all looking for all of us to do well. And so if I'm not going to buy your product, but I think it's valuable, I might call Mike and say, Mike, you ought to take a look at this company. I've seen a great willingness on the part of people in all different kind of sectors of the tech economy want to help each other thrive, and that is not the case in some of the other large markets. So in that way, Colorado is a fantastic place to get a business going.
Yeah, the sense of community here is fantastic. I mean, that's a very practical example of something that happens every day. So you take kind of the macro view of the world and say, the Fortune 500 CIOs, those women and men know each other, either directly or by one separation. Here in town, everybody knows each other closely. And we all stub our toes every once in a while, so we call each other for advice. And it transcends this client referenceability component as well. Being a shameless homer, obviously, I think this is a hotbed for just really, really smart people. It always has been. It attracts young, smart, up-and-coming people. It's been that way my entire life, and it looks like it's growing that direction. And everybody says Silicon Mountain, or this stuff. I mean, we need to be our own thing, but we're already there.
I'm only smiling because you said front range, and I'm still having to catch up with that term. So I'm not quite there yet, but I do think that there's an aspect that, this is a wonderful place to live. Lots of people want to come here. There's a good work hard, play hard sort of balance in the community, and it's big, but it's not too big. So there is that sense of community. Those linkages that exist where, if I translated that to New York or New York City, it's so big that the complexity of trying to navigate and being able to build those connections that can help you along your way, it's harder to go navigate. Here, I think between CTA, between just the concentration that you have in the main Denver metropolitan area, and then you could even add Boulder to that. You have a very nice leg of opportunity and connection to sort of build your skill set as well as to reach out to different organizations that can help. So that's very positive for Colorado.
So kind of going back a little bit on the trends, I think we've seen a couple things happen over the last 5 or 6 years that have really kind of impacted the enterprise. One of them being social media and these collaboration tools like Yammer. One bring your own device, and kind of this like free for all for any device can walk into the office and be on the corporate network. What do you see as that next thing that you got your eye on that could shutter kind of the way business is as usual inside the enterprise?
Bring your own network. So, from a security standpoint, and this is a very debatable topic. There's efficacy. Don't fall over.
Try not.
Yeah, you broke the chair.
Are we safe? Are we safe?
There's efficacy on both sides of the argument with BYOD, to do or not to do, right? I mean, we could have that discussion for hours. But the reality of wireless networks is such now. When we were blocking folks from going to certain websites, you name it, Farmville on Facebook or whatever, someone will just come in and lay down an iPhone and light up an LTE connection to all their buddies on a whole floor. So understanding how to both embrace that, make it secure, not have people feel that they're being controlled and told what to do, while at the same time making sure the enterprise is safe, is an immense challenge. Yeah. It's an immense challenge. I don't know how to fix that. He does.
I'm not going to try. For us, the next generation of technology that we think will change our business is visualization, augmented reality, and you might scratch your head and say, "What's that got to do with window coverings?" It turns out when you're buying window coverings, you'd really like to see what it'll look like in your home, in your room, with your furniture. And so we're investing in technologies that'll do that. And as I said, we don't sell directly to the end consumer, but we want to help our dealers represent the product the best possible way, so the consumer knows what they're buying. We sell what in essence are custom-built window coverings at a premium price point, and we think we'll have happier consumers and happier dealers the better look they can get at what the product is. So we have 3 different projects going around those technologies just inside Hunter Douglas North America.
Just backing up to the network real quick, I had the honor of having the ability to work with one of the great tech innovators of the last 30 years, in Charlie Ergen. And he was able to see things that a lot of people weren't. And one of the things that he realized was that wireless spectrum is huge. I mean, we don't have a true 4th generation network in this country yet. We've got generation 3.5. Verizon is not fully there yet. Once a 4th generation network is developed, some spectrum is combined, we're going to have gigabit speeds to handsets with full network saturation. Now, what does that mean? Hell, I don't know what it means. What it means is that some really, really smart people are going to be developing applications and tools that we haven't even thought about yet. We haven't even thought about whether it's content delivery or business enablement or data analytics. I mean, it opens up a world of possibilities that's extraordinary.
Eric, I would just add that I think our ability now to go get data from multiple sources, whether it's social, whether it's information that's now available through services, whether it's data that we can now extract from our own environments, whether it's transaction logs from your order entry system, the ability to put that data in the hands of the business decision makers and to put analytics or algorithms or science around that, I think that's going to become truly a way that companies start to differentiate themselves, and that competition in markets will change because people will become smarter based upon their ability to take advantage of that information. And I think we're really, we call it big data, and I know it's a marketing term, but I do think that idea that all this information is now accessible. How do you get that, and how do you glean your way through it, and how do you get it in the hands of the people who can take advantage of that and give them context to using that data is going to make a difference to how you compete. And I think we're really in the infancy in terms of seeing how that's going to change the markets that we participate in.
Yeah, what he said.
Is Peyton Manning going to take it to the end of the year?
The neck holds up. Everybody does a collective sigh every time he gets hit. Stands up.
So let's open up some questions to the crowd. I'm gonna go ahead and ask your question. I'll repeat it. And do we have a walk mic? Perfect.
So my question is basically the last one you just said, not the Manning one, but the prior one really.
Not the Manning.
And Michael, it's Michael, right? Yeah. You've touched on it a couple times, and that is, where do you see your IT infrastructure moving in terms of virtualization and software-defined? So, for example, moving to a software-defined WAN, virtualized networks, and virtualized network functions. So it's basically moving off specialized appliances to commoditized servers running everything. Where do you see your organization's heading?
So I think some of you guys probably know we have not only a fleet of satellites, but also the third largest ground-based network in the United States. And that's an infrastructure-heavy business. So we saw the software-defined side of that grow. We also saw the traditional side of it grow. I was actually in Ben's office the other night. We were talking about this very issue and kind of drawing some lines. They both went up, but the rate at which they were going up, whether you call it cloud or software-defined or using aggregation tools that didn't exist before, that was growing faster than the other components of the business, clearly.
I actually was just out at VMware, and it was interesting because I've been somewhat skeptical or maybe naive about software-defined networking, but they did a nice job of laying out their architecture, and you can start to really think now how just highly converged or commoditized high compute with disk, whatever it happens to be, and then you layer a virtual switch on top of a virtual OS, and I left thinking, dear God, that is going to be the way that the infrastructure evolves, because it just makes sense. It does not make sense to have custom ASICs unless you're driving high-end, leading-edge sort of switching speeds at speed of light type of issues. But it's going to come, and it's going to come quickly because it simplifies so many things that have been complex or hardware-driven in configuration or in data center or in infrastructure. So I don't know that it's here today. Back to the enterprise guys are risk-adverse. We probably won't be as aggressive in adopting that. But I do think that it's going to be a reality, and it's going to come a lot quicker than people anticipate it, because a lot of smart people are working on it, whether it's startups or it's large enterprise providers that see that as the future. And you look at that and say, okay, what is VMware doing? Well, what is Cisco doing? And it starts to get really interesting, right? Because you can see both sides of a very interesting dynamic that's going to play out over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I would say from our seat, we think about three things: cost, reliability, and throughput. And on any given day, one of those may nose ahead of the other. In my organization, cost noses ahead of the others very frequently. So in so much as the software-defined networks are going to give us a cost advantage, we'd be thrilled to invest in that. We'd love to see that sector of the infrastructure get commoditized.
We had one other component that I would add to that. We couldn't take 50 million eyeballs off of anything, so it had to stay up. So when we were going through a massive virtualization effort to virtualize 22,000 servers, there was a lot of tense moments, and some of the stuff, by the way, purely because of its importance, we wound up leaving on its own hardware stack, even though it wasn't being utilized fully. It was just worth it.
So piggybacking off of that a bit, by the way, thank you. This is great. Appreciate your time. I guess it's kind of a two-part question. What I'm seeing in the marketplace is people are definitely moving to virtualization, but what to me is somewhat shocking is that large enterprises are looking at Amazon for their major infrastructure. And I guess I'm in the infrastructure business. I just find it somewhat, I can see where it makes sense in some cases. I don't understand how people are educating themselves and finding Where are you guys finding your information, and how are you making decisions around this? And how educated do you think your level in the enterprise is of all? I guess I just don't understand, where are you getting information and how are you making decisions around virtualization?
And I think infrastructure as a service is probably more of a direct question.
Let me take a quick stab at that. So first of all, if we want to look at ROI metrics, large corporations, the ROI doesn't work after about 3 to 5 years out. It actually makes more sense, and I'll argue this mathematics with anybody. It actually makes more sense to have that stuff on-prem frequently when you get to that time frame, depending on your size and scale. Now, the Amazon question specifically is an interesting one. I made some pejorative comments about their security and scalability a number of years ago. Amazon has spent the last number of years working diligently on the reference architecture in their virtual private cloud. That is a completely different infrastructure than what AWS has been built on. And to where we're getting our information, when the CIA goes out and vets that thing and says, it exceeds all of our standards for security in ways that we would have never even considered AWS, okay, then it becomes viable. And is the question speed, time to delivery, can we do it quick there? And yeah, we know if we put it on there, we're kind of going to be stuck there for a number of years. Is it worth it because it's not going to pay for itself after 3 years? Those are all the kind of questions that I think we go through mentally.
I would say to the Amazon question in particular, we look at that as a low-risk, fast way to spin something up, learn, and in some cases fail. Mike made the comment before, so we're spending more time getting good at failing, which is an odd thing to say, but by that I mean making that possible, learning from it. And so we look at, obviously it's a low capital investment or no capital investment, spins up pretty fast, and maybe goes away quickly too.
Yeah, I think that this idea of what you're going to run on-prem versus off-prem is something that, we're trying to define enough of a framework or architecture to that we can make those decisions more methodically or with a more robust discipline than, sort of we currently do. And again, I think you find a broad generalization is development, smaller, quicker projects get spun up in the cloud. I don't know of large enterprises that are shutting down major data centers and moving to Amazon. We talked about virtualization earlier, and one of the challenges is that you end up with a large set of historical operating systems environments that are still running in, so moving an Oracle ERP database to Amazon is not going to be economically viable. Moving a different set of platform workload may make sense. In fact, we've been having that discussion about our big data environment because, to do some things quickly, to spin up an environment, to spin down an environment, while we're pretty good at that, we're not quite as good at Amazon when we do it internally. So, I think we're still trying to define those rules of engagement. I don't want to coin Gartner as a source, but I don't think anybody has all those answers right now. And I think we're in one of those modes where the technology is moved. There's lots of investments being made. It could be Amazon, it could be Microsoft, it could be, Google, and as a CIO, you're looking at that whole landscape and folks know Rackspace just announced that they were on the market, and then they decided they weren't on the market. And if anybody saw their stock price, it wasn't really an exciting day. But as a CIO, then you say, well, if I've got my workload on Rackspace or I have my workload, somewhere, how comfortable I am with where that particular partner is going to go. So I think that's one of the most interesting questions that I have on my desk right now is how is that workload going to evolve over the next 3 to 5 years, really?
One question to fall into that. We've seen a huge growth in DevOps, and specifically DevOps software as a service companies. Do you see companies of your scale implementing those yet, or is it still kind of in that on-premise, off-premise conundrums, where you don't really need the DevOps software to manage those tools yet? Is it coming?
I'll say in our enterprise, we're not investing in that or not even thinking much about that. So it's not been, maybe to Vin's point, it's not solving a problem that we have or we perceive as critical right now, yeah.
I'd just say that DevOps was one of our core competencies. So, one of the things we were good at is DevOps. So, not something that we would have looked at, farming outside of the shop.
Given that I look confused by the question, I'm obviously not looking at it right now.
We have two great Colorado companies up in Boulder that have really built kind of that software as a service Salesforce tool to be able to manage that off-prem, on-prem infrastructure in a really nice visualized dashboard. And you see that coming, and I think this discussion kind of sheds light that as those decisions are being made, it becomes more valuable to have that tool set at the enterprise's disposal. So, and next question.
So let me take another crack at that. My bet is that those sets of tools will probably sell first in the SMB space, because to Mike's point, we're probably pretty good at DevOps intrinsically, but in an SMB company, they probably aren't investing in the processes that make them good at that. Yeah.
But to that discussion, Eric, and maybe I have it confused, but we are looking, and one of the things that is attractive for, let's say, me and VMware is I've invested a lot in VMware as a virtualization layer. And one of the promises that VMware is making around, if we were going to use their cloud infrastructure as an example, is you can drag an OS, between your on-prem and your off-prem. And shifting that workload back to where I think that evolves at an enterprise level flexibility is, I'd like choice. I'd like to be able to move a workload from Amazon with a drag and drop capability back into my environment when I decide there's either security or performance or other aspects of that workload or economics that I want to move back in. So those types of tools, I haven't seen them fully mature yet, but that idea of interoperability, I guess I'd use the term, between off-prem and on-prem is very attractive at my level.
So I've worked as a client exec for a major manufacturer, and I know you guys get tons of phone calls every day. How do you filter out the noise? Who do you go to? Do you look at Gartner? Are you working with the client execs or manufacturers? Where do you go for advice and ultimately to make those decisions? Because I know you get a lot of this.
The primary source that I go to are our colleagues.
The question was how to filter vendors that are approaching, across the enterprise core. Yep.
I mean, at the risk of sounding like a jerk, I don't take those incoming calls because I can't. I mean, they literally will get 150 a day. So we have a process, to go through, and kind of a vetting process, which lends itself to the long sales cycle, by the way. But where did the VPs and myself primarily go to vet technologies? He's very social in nature. I pick up the phone, call Rob, say, "What do you think? You seen this?" I call Vin. He's a hell of a lot smarter than I am, and you can say, "Yeah, I've seen this. That works. This doesn't." Now, the Gartner stuff is good for kind of summary level. It can validate some information that you've looked at, but I wanted to kind of get into the details and see what actually worked in a practical use case.
I would say that I very rarely would be a first point of contact for a technology decision, right? I mean, so I get a lot of cold calls, and sometimes I'm just surprised that somebody would, I'm looking for my teams to come forward with recommendations. I do think that you can argue the good and the bad of Gartner and the trauma of getting through that gauntlet and the cost of getting through that gauntlet, but I do know that that's a source that my teams use when they're going for a first pass at who should they reach out to and contact if we have a particular, problem or technology solution that we're trying to assess. Recently a good example would be, solid state disk, where you have Pure, you have SolidFire, you've got Extreme IO, you've got a lot of vendors moving in that space. That's going to be a decision that I'm going to have a team look at, evaluate those technologies, and make a recommendation on. I think to Mike's earlier comment, I think having that reference capability, as well as having the ability to figure out in an organization who those key people are. So, when you talk about a sales strategy, starting at my box on the grid is not necessarily the right idea.
There's tremendous wisdom in what he's saying.
You really need to map that organization of who are the people who are really credible, and there's probably 12 people globally in my organization, that are going to be responsible for being the people who bring those type of recommendations through my office, and figuring that out in the space where you want to play is critical to building that credibility. Right?
And what he just counseled is profoundly valuable, because we're constantly told, call high, call high, call high. Well, there's real danger in calling high. You actually get through to me, and I don't like what I've seen, and nobody on the team has vetted it, you don't get another shot. All right? Vin's point is that there are people within our organizations who are a hell of a lot better at this stuff than we are, and building a relationship with those people and building some credibility with them so then they go in with you into his office, he's got a lot more value.
I think depending on what it is that you're selling, the decision maker is usually not me.
Right.
I might be the decision approver, but when you think about that sales motion and you map that out and say CIO is a decision maker, that's a fallacy, right? We'll be the reviewers or the approvers or the advocates, but ultimately in most of those decisions around technology, the decision maker exists at a different level in the organization.
I'm going to add on to what Mike said about sort of the social aspect of this. So as Mike says, he'll call me or Vin, and he has. That exists at every level in our organizations. So much so, it's funny, I'm working with a startup here in Colorado called Select Hub that is building kind of a collaborative social platform for evaluating technologies for just this reason. Because I've seen this work so well at our level, I've seen it work well at the level of the vice presidents and directors in our organizations. They want to reach out to their counterparts in other organizations and ask about your technology.
This also goes back to the community question that you asked earlier. I would argue there is not another place in the country where people are so kind and generous with their time. It doesn't even matter if the director from Comcast knows the director at Dish. They just pick up the phone, call them, you get a telephone call back that day. And if they can be helpful, they will. It's extraordinary.
Companies done any recent acquisitions of smaller early stage companies? Maybe you find a technology that's easier to buy it externally than build it internally. And if so, what do you look for when you're doing smaller company acquisitions?
Hunter Douglas, I'm kind of scanning back for the past few years. In general, we don't buy technology companies, infotech companies. We'll buy companies that offer manufacturing technologies that fit well with our product line. And it's interesting because we've evaluated some technology companies for the past 5 years and chose not to buy them because we didn't want to tie up our capital in that space. We felt we weren't good judges of market potential for technology companies. We're very good judges of market potential for window covering technologies.
Yeah, our ecosystem buys lots of tech companies. So from really big ones like Hughes Corporation, which is a multi-billion-dollar global entity, to Tropos up on US 36 corridor. That was a very small, 8-figure acquisition. So when we look at them, whether large or small, they've got something in their portfolio that either extends our ecosystem, makes our ecosystem more viable, or adds value to our customer base. So one of those things kind of gets checked. And sometimes that's proprietary technology, such as the Move Networks streaming technology that we acquired a few years ago. And some of it may be part of the decision to acquire Sling was the immense amount of intellectual competency that existed in that office. You walked in there and holy man, were these people smart. And there's a lot of the value.
I think the only thing that when we bought technology companies, we're really looking at adding value to our customers through the capability that those companies deliver. And I think for smaller, more entrepreneurial companies, we sort of struggle with the cultural fit and the retention, because really we need the people when we're looking at that acquisition to sustain and continue to grow that particular capability for the broader organization. And oftentimes the DNA that people enjoyed when they were in that small entrepreneurial mode gets shifted or changed when they go to a larger corporation. So, one of the challenges I think is when you look at those types of acquisitions is how are you going to structure that relationship with the larger entity so that you can sustain the value? Because the last thing you want to do in an acquisition is find out that the 15 or 20 incredibly smart people that drove all the value that you then paid a premium for are all of a sudden disenchanted, not engaged, and looking for other opportunities. So that's a very delicate balance. You know, for people in this room, there's a reason you're in the startup community, the reason you're doing the things you're doing. Those incentives sometimes are not the same when you get acquired into a larger organization. So that's a lens we always try to put on that, because it's absolutely critical. It will be a bad investment if we don't retain the talent that comes with an acquisition.
Up here front.
Thank you. Hi. So I was thinking, so you talk about long sales cycles, referenceability, solve the right problem, great stuff, right, for this audience. But also going back to, I'm thinking your organization's work in terms of budget, TCO pressures. You don't like proliferation of systems. You have an enterprise architecture blanket on traditional drivers around that for help you manage whatever you do, right? So here comes a guy knocking on the door, I got a new solution. Well, gee, that's kind of counter to a lot of those objectives around TCO proliferation, et cetera. I like your BI example there. I'm an SAP shop. Here comes a small BI guy from the outside. I'm up against, why not business objects bought by SAP, right? You know, that kind of thing. So how do you find a balance with those kind of internal, typical, from my standpoint, typical objectives that you also have? I know there ain't much in your budget left for this stuff, right? So,
you're right. There ain't much in the budget that's earmarked for small companies, but there is money in the budget earmarked for solve this business problem. So back to Vin's point, the three of us get graded on, are we helping the business grow and be more profitable? Most problems that we're solving at our level are enterprise-wide or the width of a large line of business. So there's plenty of money available for solving a business problem. And I think Mike mentioned, you're going to sell better into our organizations if you can understand what those imperatives are, what those business problems are.
Yeah, we always looked at everything through the lens of the customer. Everything was about the customer and what is IT's role in growing that business. Now, there are enormous hindrances being a large corporation, bureaucracy and paperwork and red tape. I mean, we could go on ad nauseum. There's also some really, really good things about large corporation. You're able to divide up labor very effectively, and we can aggregate large sums of money much better than smaller companies can. So I just give you an example. Some very small organization within the enterprise architecture group was our Skunkworks team. They were always looking at things with a business lens, but they were always looking at new stuff. Always. That was their charter. And I'll tell you, they'd go 6 months without looking at anything that was valuable to our business, and then all of a sudden come up with something that either made us millions of dollars or saved us millions of dollars. So it's a good entry point.
I guess I'd go back to the discussion that's a tough hurdle, right? You've got, my first reaction to another BI tool is, I've bought all of them that exist today. Why would I buy another one? But so I do think that's a challenge if that's your technology suite that you're going forward. I'll give an example where I think it was successful, which is a little bit different. But you guys may be familiar with ClickView, right? And ClickView had this nice, very functional Excel-like user interface in memory. And I was not looking at ClickView, but they went into the financial organization and managed to put together a proof of concept. So by the time it came into my organization, it was up in a proof of concept. And quite frankly, I don't mind that. It's back to the discussion of innovation. Sometimes the IT organization is very busy, and we may not be aware of a business problem that exists that somebody in a different mode or job can solve. So I don't think we should be as monolithic as maybe sometimes we can be, and we certainly have that architecture. But ClickView came in through the business. It eventually came to my desk, but we actually supported it and implemented it because it solved a unique problem for the financial community that, quite frankly, with the existing BI structure that I had, I wasn't going to be able to solve. So I think there's different strategies, again, to how you enter those, but I think the importance there was that ClickView did have a technology and a capability that when it finally did get to would we scale that or would we embrace it, there was enough differentiation that when I did put that lens on, why wouldn't I use X, there was enough value that I agreed that I would keep that in the architecture.
And I agree with Ben. I don't have a problem with folks going directly to the BU because we don't bifurcate between IT and the business. IT's part of the business. Now, I'm going to tattletale on him because he's not sitting here, but if Mark Indry was sitting here, and Mark is one of the giants in our business. He's been a CIO of some of the largest companies in the world. He has a completely divergent view on this, and it's based in cost. If you were to go over and sell around Indry's organization, it'd be the last time you ever walked in the front door. And he's got very solid reasons for that. So all I would counsel you is, while the three guys up here are probably all right with it, be very careful with it. Very careful with it.
One last question.
I was just going to probably parlay off of your comments, Mike. Maybe just some further commentary on sort of the disruption that's happening in your role, right? Which is that you have technology that can be implemented quickly, whether it's rapid application development or SaaS solutions that the business can implement. And in many cases, the business is reaching out to the vendor to kind of bring them through the process. And you find yourselves learning about this new endeavor 3 or 4 months into the process. So I guess the question is, how are you embracing that inevitable change? Do you have processes in place? How should organizations that are trying to sell into the business interact with you? And then finally, just a thought. I think, Rob, you had mentioned a product that you're looking to implement called Select Hub, which I think plays into this whole conversation in that it gives you an opportunity to wrangle all these sort of disparate evaluations that are underway. Because as an enterprise software salesperson myself, working with large companies, you typically find that these things happen disparately and maybe the evaluation isn't done correctly. So by having a system like Select Hub in place, I think it gives you some control and then also allows you to ensure that the right stakeholders are involved. So it's a pretty convoluted question, but I guess it's all about how is this disruption affecting your roles, and any commentary is appreciated.
Well, it's a pretty well understood change in the marketplace that almost as much technology is going to be bought from outside the IT organization as inside. And the estimates vary. Is it in the next 3 years, 5 years? But you're right. That is where the tide is going. So I've given up. 5 years ago we tried to hold back that tide, and I've long since abandoned that. That's a fool's errand. My coaching for a tech vendor would be, it's fine to sell into the business, and in fact, they're going to put you through the paces of, are you really solving a business problem, probably more quickly than the IT organization. But just know that your path will eventually lead through IT, and we're then going to ask the questions of, is it scalable, is it secure, is it cost effective, and we'll ask them from a different angle than, say, the finance organization or the operations organization. So you want to be prepared for both sets of questions and have good answers for them.
Your question is almost more of a dialogue. It'd be interesting to sit down and have that, larger conversation at some juncture. But as it affected me specifically, I went from being the global chief information officer to the global chief digital officer. And that was a very, very big change in the way that we looked at the world. And that's a longer conversation, but if you understand the divergence in some of those roles, and then what I started caring about because of that, addressed some of the things that you're talking about.
Yeah, because you hear this concept of the chief information marketing officer,
Correct.
Right, which is kind of in line with what you're talking about.
Correct, and selling something. There was a P&L wrapper around all of this.
Well, gentlemen, this has been really exciting, and thank you very, very much for coming down to Basecamp Launch by Chase here at Denver Startup Week this year. Let's give a huge round of applause to our panelists, Vin Melvin, Rob Milan, and Michael Marcotte. Really thank you for spending some time with us. As I said earlier, this wouldn't be possible without the great help from the Downtown Denver Partnership, the Colorado Technology Association, Chase, and Comcast. And we really hope you enjoy this last day of Denver Startup Week. A bunch of festivities around here today. I think there's about 35 events scattered around the city. And then everything culminates tonight at Galvanize at 6 o'clock for the grand finale celebration of entrepreneurship and startups. So have a wonderful day, and thank you very much.